basically going to cover this concept of relative valuation. Uh, Now, what is relative valuation when we consider it? As we've probably seen some of this in our previous sections. Relative valuation is basically the comparison of similar kind of companies or similar kind of assets, right? So when you are comparing similar assets, then you can arrive at what should be the pricing of a particular asset when compared to the other one, right? So relative valuation basically works on this premise that the market probably values assets correctly. And because it values assets correctly, then there shouldn't be significant differentiation in seemingly similar companies, right? Now, as against the concept of DCF valuation, DCF, if we remember, is absolute valuation. What do we mean by absolute valuation? This is independent for each company. You don't really consider other companies in the valuation of one particular company. Relative valuation, on the other hand, as the name suggests, is relative. It depends on the other companies. It is dependent on what the valuation in the market is, correct? So what we're going to look at in this is what is it that we're looking at in relative valuations, some mechanisms on how do we calculate relative valuation ratios, so trailing and forward ratios, and we'll understand what these are. Then specific major ratios that are used globally are price to earnings, price to book, price to sales, EV by EBITDA. Within these, we do have an understanding on the price to earnings ratio in some of our earlier readings. We now will get deeper in terms of understanding what does it really mean and what really drives relative valuations. That's going to be our primary exercise in our overall discussion that we look at, right? Now, industry specific ratios are then extensions of these ratios where we look at specifically, how does the ratio analysis or relative valuations work within a variety of industries, and are there any industry specific ratios that we can look at and we understand them, right? So that's the broader premise. Let's first quickly recap what do we mean by relative valuation. It's a technique where we value an asset based on the valuation of other similar assets in the market. The key here is to find comparable firms or assets, standardize the data, which basically means if there is any kind of discrepancy in terms of the direct usage of data. Let's say one company has a Jan to December year cycle, financial year cycle. The other company has April to March financial year cycle. We can't directly use it. We need to standardize it to compare it to the same periods, right? So that's something that would then obviously become a relevant part. And then we adjust for other differences, some of which could be subjective in nature, right? What do we mean by subjective differences? Things like corporate governance, things like market structure, things like does the company have a lot of focus within India or outside India? It might be in the same segment, but then there are other differences that play out. Things like is it catering to exactly the same industry or no? So that becomes a very, very important consideration while standardizing and adjusting for relative valuation metrics, right? Now, on a more conceptual level, why is it that it comes intuitively to all of us? Is because we just keep comparing stuff we feel is similar to find the value. We try and find out what gives us more value for our money, what basically creates more value for our money, and we just keep comparing stuff all the time. Psychologically, in our mind, it is hardwired to do that. So, when I'm buying a shoe, is this shoe better than that? When I'm flying airlines, is it Indigo or is it Jet? I keep comparing that all the time, right? So that's basically what relative valuation is. Now, why, however, relative valuation becomes more popular than, let's say, something like absolute valuation or something like DCF valuation? There are a variety of factors. And the first one of those factors is primarily that it is less time and resource intensive. It's inherently simpler. So there is a sort of a simplicity that plays out here. It's inherently simpler, less time and resource intensive. It is a much faster way of arriving at a value rather than, let's say, something like a DCF valuation, which is going to take significant amounts of time if we are going to do that, right? The second one that plays out is that it's slightly easier to explain and defend. Since you start with relative numbers, right? Then technically, it's not like you're wrong in isolation with something. You're wrong with respect to something. If things go down, let's say I buy the stock of Infosys and it falls, it's possibly because other stocks also fell. So all other stocks also have a higher valuation and they fell. And hence, because of the relative comparison, when someone is using relative valuation as an analyst, they're not directly being judged against only their ability to calculate it, but also the market's ability to price things correctly or not. Then there are market imperatives that play out. What do we mean by this? Let's assume you are a fund manager. You are a fund manager who's managing a fund of any mutual fund, and you suddenly get a lot of inflow in your funds. The investors have already decided that they want to invest in the equity markets, right? Now, because the investors have already decided that they want to kind of invest in the equity markets, basically what we are saying is that that decision is taken. You can now not decide to keep your money in cash. Once you get the money, it's quite possible that the entire market is away from fundamentals. The entire market may be, for example, seemingly overvalued in your opinion. Now, within that, if you use DCF, you'll never be able to invest. You will never be able to invest in a particular company purely because, DCF is an absolute valuation and you'll get a scenario where it'll appear that the company is overvalued, right? So purely following DCF valuations can keep investors out of the market much longer. You have to find, if the entire market is overvalued, you have to find which is the least overvalued stock, relatively speaking, right? So that's where relative valuations become useful. And finally, it's very useful when data is not completely available. For firms where there are multiple businesses and stakes in other businesses, it's a useful way of trying to find out value for those businesses. Take for example Reliance Jio, right? The telecom venture that Reliance has. Now the problem with directly valuing them is we don't know what the revenue number is, and we surely don't know what the profit number is for this particular business. That data is not available as of now, right? What we do have is the subscriber number, right? So if we can try and identify what is the market value per subscriber, let's say for another company, like let's say Airtel or let's say Idea Cellular, then we can try and make some benchmark as to what should be the total value of the subscribers that Reliance Jio has at this point of time, right? And because of that, it's extremely useful in allowing us to value some specific set of companies where these are conglomerates, there are multiple businesses, but we do not necessarily have all the information about all the businesses available. So we try and attribute some value based on similar businesses in the market. Similarly, if I was to value Reliance Retail, again, we may not have too many numbers, so we might resort to something like what is the ratio of the market cap of the company, market capitalization of the company to the sales of the company, right? And I can compare it to the market cap of sales to sales ratio of something like Future Retail or any other retail company for that matter to try and identify if this makes sense or not, right? So relative valuation becomes extremely popular because of these reasons. However, we need to be careful that this simplicity and the fact that it can be used easily also becomes a sort of a problem because it tends to get misused. When I say tends to get misused, it means that we have not really taken into consideration all the angles and we directly start applying it blindly. Then relative valuation could be a dangerous game because it might mislead us into believing if the stock is cheap or expensive, right? We'll look at examples and understand that as we go along. Before we go ahead, we also need to kind of finalize that there are two broad points that we need to take care while using relative valuations. The first one is uniformity and the second one is consistency. What do we mean by these two? So uniformity basically says that when you're calculating a ratio, which is a combination of numerator divided by denominator, let's say something like price to earnings ratio, the definitions that you're using for price or earnings or the numerator or the denominator, the definitions has to be uniform across the companies that you are comparing, across the time periods that you are comparing. So if I'm calculating the ratios for Infosys, TCS, Wipro, then I need to take the same definition of price and I need to take the same definition of earnings. I cannot use different definitions. That's going to distort my data points, right? There needs to be uniformity in choosing the financial year also, whether it is December ending or March ending. So if it is December ending for some firm, then I need to adjust a little bit. I need to standardize the data in order to make it March ending, or I use the 4 quarters that include the March ending year, right? So that's the first part. The second part is consistency in terms of how do we use this metric, right? So what do we mean by consistency? The numerator and denominator should be consistently defined. To understand this, we are going to go back to one of our discussions on ratio analysis earlier. If you remember, return on equity is calculated as net profit by equity, but return on capital employed includes EBIT on the numerator and equity plus debt on the denominator, right? Now, you will note or recall that if the denominator applies to only the equity holders, then the numerator also applies only to the equity holders. If the denominator applies to equity and debt holders, then the numerator also applies to equity and debt holders both, which means EBIT is a measure of profit which includes, what is EBIT? Can we define EBIT as net profit plus interest plus tax? Since tax is a constant, we don't worry too much about it. But if you note, the numerator has a component for equity and it has a component for debt as well. And that's basically why we use consistency principles, which says that both the numerator and the denominator should point to the same set of stakeholders. What do we mean by this? Price to earnings is a consistent ratio. Why? Is because price is the stock price and earnings are also for the stockholders, correct? But same token, price to sales may not be a consistent metric. Why? Because price is for the stockholder, but sales gives you money which settles both the stock and debt holders, correct? So it's important to kind of make this consideration. At some point of time, we'll understand what could be the problems because of this inconsistency if it creeps in, and how do you address this inconsistency as you go along, right? That's the first part of it. Now, there's another thing that we need to kind of consider, which is something called as trailing versus forward numbers, right? So if we are standing at a particular point of time, forward is basically future. It also means forward means expected numbers, right? So for example, if we calculate a ratio that uses earnings, I'm just going to prepone the discussion of price to earnings ratio. Price to earnings is the price of the stock divided by earnings per share of the stock. The EPS of the company is basically going to be denoted as either forward or trailing. So if let's say I'm using the expected earnings for FY18, the expected earnings for FY18 or the expected earnings for FY19, that is basically going to be forward because today we are in FY17, right? So the expected FY18 or FY19 earnings are what is called as forward earnings. So I can divide it by the price by FY18 expected EPS, correct? Us being in 2017 at this point of time, this would become a forward EPS measure for us, correct? Now, what is the trailing EPS? How do you calculate the trailing EPS, or what does trailing mean? Trailing means either the last year, so either the last financial year or the last 12 months of data or last 4 quarters of data available, right? So last 4 quarters is known as trailing 12 months. TTM is known as trailing 12 months. So how do we calculate the trailing EPS? Let's say we are trying to calculate trailing 12-month EPS for Infosys in February 2017. So by February 2017, you do not have results for March available. You do not have results for April to March. So if you were to construct a timeline and look at the 4 quarters, so that's 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is April to June. Then you have July to September. Then you have October to December, and you have Jan to March, right? At this point of time, you have results available. If you are in February 2017, you have results available for Q1. This is Q1. results available for Q2, results available for Q3, but Q4 is not yet available. So trailing 12 months then takes you to one more quarter behind this, which is the previous year December, right? So the previous year Jan to March quarter, which is the Q4 for the last year, is what is available. You add these four to arrive at what is the TTM EPS for Infosys. Let's try and find it out. So we'll go to the Infosys website and then try and get down to the Investors tab. When we get down to the Investors tab, we will look at what is going to be the results. So we can look at reports and filings, and we find the third quarter results available, right? So I can click on the results for the third quarter. It gives me a lot of data points. What is the highlights of standalone and consolidated numbers? I can look at IFRS INR press release here. And when we look at this data, it will open up and calculate and give us the data for Infosys for those particular quarters. And in this quarter of results, we'll see if we can find out data for earlier quarters as well, right? So this is just the highlights that we see. And if you look at this data, it gives you some form or fashion of the calculations that are available. So it tells you what is the revenue. This is the condensed consolidated statements of comprehensive income for this and Infosys Limited and subsidiaries. So consolidated data is available. What you see here is the 3 months ended December 31st, 2016. You also see 9 months ended December 31st, 2016. Correct? So you find this data, and in this EPS of 47.03 is available with you, right? This EPS of 47.03 is available with you. In addition to this, you need to go and then calculate the exact data in terms of the previous set of numbers as well, right? So we have, if you look at this 47.03 basically is for these three periods. So we have 47.03 available as the EPS for these 3 quarters. Now we need to find out Q4, which is Jan to March 2016 quarter, which is Q4 for 2016. What is the data there? So I can go to reports and filings. I can look at previous results, and I can try and find out the Jan to March 2014 results. I can either go individually and look at all the results. So this is the 2014 result. Click on this. I can go and click on press release for IFRS INR. And when we go further on the sheet, we should see the data for only the 3 months ended March 31st, 2016. So when we look at this data, the EPS for this period is 15.74. 15.74 is the EPS for this particular period. So what do? We take 15.74, which is basically the EPS for Q4, and to this we add 47.03. What do we get? So essentially 15.74 plus 47.03 is going to give me approximately 62.77. This is the trailing 12-month EPS for Infosys. And if I want to calculate what is the trailing PE ratio, I take the current market price of Infosys and divide it by this. So I take the market price per share and divide it there. So this is basically how we are going to calculate trailing numbers for any particular company. That's how we go and calculate trailing numbers for any particular company, where we can individually go to each of the quarterly results and add the EPS of each of the last 4 quarters which are available, or we can get the data whenever a quarterly result comes. It also includes the result for the year till then. So if it is Q3 results, then you will see the combined number for the first 3 quarters in the year, and that is basically how you calculate the trailing EPS for a particular company, or a trailing EBITDA, or a trailing any kind of number for the company can be calculated using the same methodology, right? And as we come to an end of this particular video, we're going to look at a couple of quick questions. What are the reasons for the popularity of relative valuations? And explain the difference between trailing and forward numbers. Thank you.